It didn't feel real at first. The kind of news that doesn't register until hours later, when the silence finally sinks in. The founder of one of the most influential youth movements in the country was gone. A man who had built his organization from dorm rooms and folding tables, whose voice echoed across campuses nationwide, suddenly erased in a single moment. Supporters gathered online, stunned. Messages poured in. Tributes flooded timelines. And for a brief moment, everything froze. But behind the scenes, nothing froze at all. Within hours, meetings were happening that most people didn't even know existed. Phones buzzed late into the night. Lawyers, board members, and senior advisors moved fast. Too fast. By the time the public was still processing what had happened, the machinery of power was already in motion. And that's where this story truly begins. For years, the movement had revolved around one man. Not because he demanded it, but because he refused to let anyone else dilute the mission. He didn't trust vague committees or outside consultants. He believed control was the only way to protect the message. Those closest to him knew the rule: loyalty first, ideology second, ambition last. He kept his inner circle small for a reason. Yet in the final year of his life, people noticed changes. New faces started appearing in meetings. Conversations that used to happen openly were suddenly moved behind closed doors. Travel schedules shifted without explanation. Donors he once avoided were now requesting access. At first, it seemed like growth. Expansion always brings friction. But some of his closest allies later said he wasn't comfortable with it. He reportedly complained that too many people were trying to steer the organization in directions he didn't approve of. He felt pressure, not from opponents, but from inside his own walls. The final tour was meant to reset everything. A nationwide run of events designed to reconnect with students, rebuild trust, and remind everyone why the movement existed in the first place. The university stop that day was supposed to be one of the biggest. Thousands registered. Media interest was high. The energy felt electric, but from the moment he arrived, something felt off. Security placement wasn't what it usually was. Certain areas that were typically restricted were open. Staff members were reassigned at the last minute without clear explanations. Some witnesses later said the founder looked distracted, even uneasy, as if he was scanning the room instead of feeding off the crowd. Then everything spiraled. What happened next unfolded in chaos. Panic, screams, confusion. Within minutes, the event was shut down. Emergency responders arrived, officials took control. And just like that, the moment that would define everything was sealed off from public view. The narrative formed almost immediately. Authorities claimed the situation was isolated. A single suspect. A simple explanation. The public was assured there was no broader threat. Media outlets repeated the same phrases. Case closed. Except it wasn't. People watching closely noticed the timeline didn't line up. Certain details were corrected, then corrected again. Access points that should have been secured were never mentioned. Reports about warnings raised before the event quietly disappeared from coverage. And then came the silence from people who had been closest to the founder that day. Instead of answers, something else took center stage: leadership. Less than 2 days after the tragedy, the board announced that the founder's widow would step into the top role. Not as a placeholder, not as an interim figure, as the permanent head of the organization. The announcement shocked insiders. This wasn't something the founder had openly discussed. He'd never indicated a succession plan involving family. In fact, some claim he'd resisted mixing personal relationships with organizational power altogether. Yet suddenly the decision was framed as obvious, natural, necessary. Supporters were told it was about honoring his legacy. But inside the organization, the shift felt abrupt. Meetings were restructured. Decision-making chains changed. Advisors who had served for years found themselves sidelined. Others were removed entirely without explanation. And that was only the beginning. Within weeks, the tone of the movement transformed. Messaging softened. Events became more controlled, more polished. Spontaneity vanished. The raw energy that once defined the organization was replaced with rehearsed talking points and tightly managed appearances. To the public, it looked like professionalism. To insiders, it felt like erasure. That's when a former ally decided to speak up. She had worked closely with the founder for years. They'd shared platforms, private conversations, long debates about the future of the movement. She knew how fiercely he guarded control. And now she was watching that control shift faster than anyone could explain. At first, her comments were careful. She framed her concerns as questions. Why were certain people suddenly running things? Why were longtime staff being pushed out? Why did the restructuring seem pre-planned? Then her tone changed. She claimed she had seen messages suggesting leadership transitions were discussed before the tragedy. Conversations about donor access, about contracts, about who would steady the organization if something happened. Not hypotheticals. Logistics. The claim ignited everything. Supporters split into camps overnight. Some accused her of exploiting grief. Others said she was the only one brave enough to say what everyone else was thinking. The organization responded with silence, which only fueled speculation. And then the digging began. Independent researchers started looking into connections surrounding the new leadership. Outside consultants appeared on financial disclosures. Firms with no previous ties to the movement were suddenly advising strategy. Meetings were held off the books. Travel records didn't match public explanations. Online, anonymous accounts emerged, defending the leadership aggressively. They used similar phrases, posted at the same times, pushed identical talking points. Analysts noticed patterns that suggested coordination rather than coincidence. Inside the organization, fear grew. Employees were asked to sign confidentiality agreements. Some were warned not to speak to media for the sake of unity. Others claimed meetings were held without notes, without records, leaving no trace of who approved what. Meanwhile, the movement itself began to fracture. Local chapters distanced themselves from national leadership. Donations dipped. Volunteers walked away. The organization that once prided itself on grassroots rebellion now looked increasingly corporate, increasingly distant from its base. And still, the questions went unanswered. Why did the leadership shift happen so fast? Why were warnings allegedly ignored? Why did so many decisions seem ready to go the moment tragedy struck? Then came the announcement that changed everything. The former ally declared she would confront the new leader publicly. Live. No edits. No filters. She said she would present messages, recordings, and documents that would expose what she believed was a coordinated power grab. The internet exploded. Supporters called it the showdown of the decade. Critics warned it would tear the movement apart. The organization issued a brief statement reaffirming confidence in its leadership, but avoided addressing any specific claims. Behind the scenes, tension escalated. Security around the upcoming event was quietly increased. Lawyers were reportedly involved on both sides. Advisors urged silence. But the former ally refused to back down. She said the truth mattered more than comfort. As the debate approached, new revelations surfaced. Former staff members came forward anonymously, claiming the founder had expressed fear in his final months, that he felt watched, that certain meetings didn't feel safe, that people he once trusted were pushing him toward compromises he didn't agree with. Some alleged he'd warned colleagues that if anything ever happened to him, the organization would be taken over by people who didn't share his values. Whether those messages were real or not, they struck a nerve. Because the movement no longer felt like his. The closer the confrontation got, the quieter official channels became. Media coverage softened. Questions were reframed. The focus shifted away from the past and toward moving forward. But the past refused to stay buried. Supporters continued digging. Financial shifts, staffing changes, strategic partnerships that made no sense given the organization's original mission. Everything pointed to a transformation that had little to do with grief and everything to do with control. And now, the moment everyone has been waiting for is nearly here. If the former ally is lying, her credibility will collapse on live air. But if she's telling the truth, the fallout could destroy everything the movement has become. Because this story was never just about one tragic day. It's about what happens when power moves faster than truth. when silence becomes strategy, when a legacy turns into leverage. Was it simply a heartbreaking loss followed by necessary leadership? Or was it the most efficient transfer of power anyone has ever seen? The confrontation is coming. And when it does, one version of this story won't survive it.